So, hi Tony, thanks so much for being here today. We're here to talk about a period of your life about 15 years ago where you experienced an episode of depression.
Yeah.
Can you tell me a bit more about that?
Yeah, it was a time when I was going through a divorce, and it wasn't a divorce that I wanted, but nevertheless my former wife insisted that she wanted a divorce, and really I just felt very, very low about it all. It was not what I wanted. I could understand why she wanted that, but nevertheless it was something that really went very much against my grain and my emotional feelings. Yeah.
So that was kind of the main cause of your depression.
Yeah.
Was there anything else going on at the time as well?
No, it was mainly that, and of course concern about our children and the effect it would have on them, because at that stage they were all sort of ranging from early teenagers to late teenagers, so it was a fairly critical time in their lives as well, and so I think that really did get to me. Yeah.
And what kind of symptoms were you experiencing that led you to realise it was depression?
I think just the feeling of just not wanting to go out, wanting to just stay at home, not see people, just almost going into hibernation, I suppose, you know, and just everything just seemed to be shutting down all the time. Yeah. And if I had to go out and do things, which of course I had to do, it was a real effort. And I really just wanted to get back home as soon as I'd done those things and shut the door.
What kind of thoughts were going through your mind at the time?
I mean, I think, you know, immense sadness, sort of really deep sadness, and perhaps more than that, sort of real agony about it all, really. Thoughts of being helpless, you know, feeling that things were out of my control and I didn't have any options available. And it was those kind of things, really. I only felt, one occasion I felt almost suicidal. And I can vividly remember that now. I was driving, it wasn't in Leeds, I was driving along a main road, and the thought just popped into my head, they ought to be all far better without me. And I almost sort of tweaked this steering wheel as I was going along. Fortunately, I didn't. And having experienced that thought never sort of came back into my head.
Sometimes when people are experiencing depression, they also describe experiencing like disturbed sleep and their appetite is affected, either more hungry or less hungry. Did you have any of those kind of physical experiences as well?
Certainly, my appetite was certainly depressed, and you know, it did take an effort to make sure I was eating. I don't remember actually having insomnia. No, I don't remember that, but that might just be my memory.
And you're a vicar?
Yeah.
So I'm wondering how your depression impacted upon your work at the time.
I really didn't quite know how to handle it as far as my congregation and work were concerned. Inevitably, you know, you live a fairly public life anyway. And so at some point, you know, the congregation had to be told that my wife and I were separating. And I can vividly remember doing that. I had a conversation with the church officials before that, so we actually planned what I was going to say and what their response would be. But yes, I can vividly remember having to stand up at the beginning of a church service and say that my wife and I were separating, which I think was really quite a shock to the congregation because most people didn't realise there was anything wrong. So yes, I can vividly remember that.
And what was their reaction after you told them?
Surprisingly sympathetic. I mean, I think this is one of the things that really did surprise me. And you know, when you go through a situation like that, you actually find that a lot of people have been through that same situation themselves, and that was something that surprised me. And the number of people who said, oh yes, I've been through that, or yes, I sympathise with you about that. And of course, it's very difficult when you have to tell family and friends as well. And certainly with friends, I found that some friends went along with my ex-wife, other friends went along with me. But there was certainly a good core of friends who actually still kept relationships with us both. And I was really very grateful for that. Yeah.
Was there any turning points during, I suppose, your episode of depression? You've described your kind of really low moment where you were having suicidal thoughts. Were there any turning points where you realised things were improving, or on that, you were beginning maybe a recovery?
I think one of the turning points was that talking to my sister, who was a great support, and she at that time was a nurse, and she didn't live near me, but telephone conversations, and she said, you really do need to go and see your doctor. And so I did that, and I went to see my GP, who again was very sympathetic. And he did actually say, yes, it's a hard time you're going through at the moment, but I think you'll probably find that most people say, having gone through the divorce, things will actually improve, that you'll see that this probably was the right way to go. And he did prescribe me antidepressants. I can't remember what they are at the moment. And he prescribed me the antidepressants, and I took them home. And strangely enough, I put them in the cupboard and never actually used them. But I think actually going to see the GP and talking to him about this, and then giving me the antidepressants and me knowing that they were there, was in itself sufficient. And I think that actually was quite a turning point, which made me feel that you can actually cope with this.
Was it a GP that you already knew and had a pre-existing relationship with that you talked to?
I think like most GP practices, you don't often see the same doctor twice. I had actually seen him on a couple of occasions, but I wouldn't say that I knew him well or that he knew me well. And maybe that was a good thing. As somebody several stages removed and out of the situation, and I think that probably was helpful, that I didn't feel that I was trespassing upon our relationship in that way. You're a sort of professional person, and this is the advice.
And what did you find particularly helpful? Because it sounds like that GP was quite important to you in your journey.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering, was there anything about that GP that you found particularly helpful for you?
I think, I suppose it's always the same with GPs, they're not shocked by anything because they've seen it all before. And I think there was certainly that feeling that he knew what I was going through, and he could understand what my feelings were, and that he was very encouraging, I think, and saying, well, things will get better,
The standard length of a GP appointment is about 10 minutes. I know it's a really long time ago, but I suppose what I'm wondering is, did you feel like maybe you got a bit longer than the standard appointment at that time?
Looking back on it, I don't think I was with him actually all that long. I think I just explained what the situation was, and he responded and eventually gave me the prescription. I don't remember it being a double-length appointment.
Things have changed in primary care since 15 years ago. Over the last 10 years, there's been the introduction of psychological interventions as standard as a first-line intervention for depression, anxiety. Would you have wanted to have been offered that if that had been available to you?
I don't think so. I mean, I did actually get a counsellor anyway, apart from the GP practice, and that was certainly helpful. But I think on the whole, I think what was most helpful to me was actually friends rallying round and, taking me out for a drink and making sure that I was not by myself all the time. I mean, I think that was something really important. And also when the congregation actually knew what had happened and what was happening, I think this feeling that it was all out in the open and I didn't need to hide anything anymore was again quite powerful. And I did actually find that actually going out and meeting people, even informally, and getting out of the house actually really did a lot for me. And I think going public about it actually enabled me to do that.
And I'm just wondering about your role as a vicar as well. How did that play into your recovery? Was it helpful, or maybe there was challenges in that?
And I think initially, I mean, I felt guilty about it all. You know, these things shouldn't happen to a vicar, kind of thing. You know, but I mean, you know, that's life. And I think in terms of my religion and spirituality, I think there was initially quite a sense of guilt about it. You know, this shouldn't have happened. But also, I think it did actually change my spiritual attitude as well, because as Christians, you know, you believe that Jesus became human as one of us. And I started reading some of the Bible stories and thinking, well, if this has happened to me, these are the kind of challenges that would have happened to Jesus, and what did he make of it? And I think as I read through the gospel stories, I could see that, yeah, well, maybe he was depressed as well. You know, maybe he felt abandoned by people. You know, maybe he was challenged by personal relationships. And I think that gave me a sort of a different interpretation of what I was reading. And so rather than the feeling that, you know, he was against me wagging a finger at me, I actually got the feeling that, well, yes, actually, he's gone through these things too. And I think that was quite a changing point, although it was gradual over a period of time. But I think reading different things into the stories, I think, was quite important.
Was there a moment where you knew that you were better? A time where you can pinpoint and say that was when it was over, or was it really gradual?
I think it was gradual. After a while, I changed parishes, and I was out of ministry for a bit, and went back to school teaching. And I think that transition period really was you know, important, just to be doing something different, and just to sort of step away from it for a bit. And I was teaching for about 5 years, and then went back into ministry. And in that time, I got remarried as well at that point. So I think that that break from ministry, I think, was important, because the difficulty about ministry is that you're in it all the time. You know, you wear a dog collar and everybody knows who you are, kind of stuff. And I think actually going into doing something different, like being a teacher, which is obviously is hard work, but nevertheless, at the end of the day, you know, you cast that role off and you're yourself again in a funny kind of way. So I think that transition period was important.
And my last question, is there any advice that you would have for your 20-year-old self, or maybe for our students who might be around that age?
Yeah. I mean, in my ministry, I do obviously encounter people with mental health problems and depression and this sort of thing. And what I try to encourage them to do as much as they can is to get out into the community and to meet people, you know, and reassure them that people are not going to be as judgmental as they think they might be. And I think in my ministry now, I've tried to encourage people with mental health difficulties, you know, not to stay behind closed doors, but to get out into the community and, you know, offer my support to enable them to do that. So I think looking back on myself, you know, just get out, even if it's just walking the dog, but just get outside, and being outside actually does more good than just sitting at home. On the other hand, I know that's far easier said than done.